All right, Sagar, what's on your radar?
Full confession, I had an entire other radar written and it was ready to go for today. But then something happened that made me so hopped up and mad, I literally dropped everything I was doing. I sat down at my computer and I cranked this out for all of you so that you could share in my rage. And it all starts with Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who went on my favorite podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience. I was actually looking forward to that conversation, as Joe is such a great interviewer. But then I took a look at one of the YouTube clips, and things went really sideways. Crenshaw managed to say a litany of both false and stupid and outright laughable things within the span of just 8 minutes that I had to address for all of you. Let's start with the title of the video itself. Dan Crenshaw's problem with stimulus checks. Oh man, my red blood cells are firing, as I'm sure that you can tell. Let's see how Dan sets up his argument.
There's value in suffering. And in today's society, we have convinced ourselves that there is no value in suffering, that the entire role of, say, government is to end your suffering. But this is a false promise. Not only is it a false promise, but it will create a weak society that is unable to sustain itself. That's a really important point, and I think there's deep truth in that. This is why victimhood politics is so dangerous, and I would say populism is too. I think the two are almost indistinguishable from each other.
Oh man, there's a lot going on there. So let's take it to its logical conclusion. According to the congressman, suffering is really important. So during a once-in-a-century pandemic, while the government has the ability to alleviate the suffering of its citizens for overall public health, they should not do so because it makes society weak. This is a classic libertarian argument that is incredibly stupid and discredited. Literally, what is the point of granting so much authority to the government if not for this specific purpose? And as for the economic argument, I'll speak their language and explain how dumb this is. Why is it a good idea for our human capital stock to en masse lose wages, productivity, shelter, and more as a result of something that is literally not their or anyone else's fault? Furthermore, if the government specifically is going to send you home, close your business, and more than that, in this case, especially, do they not owe them some remuneration? Wouldn't it actually cost more as a society in long run to let everything fail and then try to rebuild things from destructive scratch later? The answer to all those questions is yes, and we're just getting started here, folks. Let's keep going.
Here's what populism is. It's telling you what you feel. It's mirroring your feelings back to you. It's telling you what you want to hear as opposed to the truth. So I think that's a decent definition of populism. I don't like it. I don't like people embracing it. It doesn't just mean, hey, things that are good that people are for. Well, you know what? A lot of people are for $1,600 checks that are free. That doesn't mean it's a good policy.
Right.
Oh man, clear old Dan hasn't read a history book in a long time. That's probably one of the dumbest articulations of populism I've ever heard. But notice how Crenshaw casts himself. He is willing to tell you the truth. And the truth, according to him, is that there is no way out, that you must suffer as a result of this pandemic, that despite promises, our social contract, etc., the government cannot or shouldn't do anything for you. And therefore, he's the real hero. Meanwhile, people like myself or Crystal are charlatans for barking about how people deserve stuff from their governments. Okay, let's keep imbibing his wisdom.
It's populism on steroids. It's telling you what you want to hear. And that's not truth. That's not truth. And we have to get back to truth. And we have to get away from this victimhood mentality where we actually elevate this idea of being helpless. See, that's what's changed. That's what's changed in the last decade. It used to be that, well, you might feel some shame if you were the type to, you know what, I need some help. I feel bad about it. I'm going to get back on my feet, but I need some help right now. That used to be the sort of American way, all right? We need a safety net. Nobody would disagree with that. We need a safety net. We need to help people who have truly fallen on hard times, who lost their jobs because of COVID. But does that also mean we need to provide a $1,400 check to somebody who never lost their job and whose biggest hardship has been Zoom meetings? Of course not.
There it is. It's populism on steroids to say that people deserve a check. It's okay to have a safety net, but giving people money who haven't lost their job is immoral and a waste of taxpayer dollars. There's a lot going on here. Let's start with square one. Stimulus checks are actually the most efficient way to plug the massive holes in our unemployment system, which Congressman Crenshaw actually says work well. Tax data is actually not here for 2020. Many people technically are still employed but working less hours. Many people actually lost their jobs, got hired, lost them again as a result of all of the regulations we've had over the last year. Some people who made $150K in contract work in 2019 have nothing right now. So that dumb argument is over. But let's really engage here. Later on in the clip, Crenshaw says, quote, "There's an incentive now to pay people off with their own money. Anyone want to riddle me that? But what really sticks in my craw is this. Dan Crenshaw and many GOP members who are completely against the stimulus checks somehow completely understand the stimulatory effects of money in people's pockets when it comes to tax cuts." Well, look what I found here. Dan Crenshaw in 2019 tweets, quote, "Why does the left hate tax cuts? Because they think people exist to fund the government. Here's the key line. When people keep their money, we get more jobs and wage growth and less wasteful spending by benevolent bureaucrats." Very interesting, Congressman. So people make better decisions with their money. And as Crenshaw idiotically said, people are being bought off by their own tax dollars. But with tax cuts, it's their money, and it's better that they spend it. Okay. So money in people's pockets are good when it's a tax cut, but not when it's a stimulus check. Unless, of course, in the middle of the tax cut, the increase in the tax cut is paired with a giant corporate tax cut, which they use to buy back a bunch of their own stock and don't actually use to actually invest in anything productive in our economy. I'm beginning to understand. Tax cuts and stimulatory effects work only for businesses, not regular citizens. I'm really starting to get a little closer to Crenshaw logic. But if you really want to see his sheer ideological incoherence, this is it.
This is the demise of the republic. When people are comfortable with being bought off with their own tax dollars and being comfortable, and more than that, comfortable with being told that they're victimized and that some other group is responsible for that victimization.
Right. So it's not just that they're in a bad situation. They're in a bad situation because someone did it to you.
And maybe it's the 1%. Maybe it's those mean corporate giants. And now those corporate giants are trying to get all woke and get on the Democrats' good side, like they always do.
Yeah.
Because they want to maintain their little piece of the pie.
Leaving aside how dumb it is to describe how being bought off against your own tax dollars, notice there Crenshaw excoriates people who say you're suffering because of people like Big Bad Corporation, and then in the very same breath says that corporations are going woke in order to, quote, keep their piece of the pie. I'm confused because the congressman just implied to me that their piece of the pie was totally legitimate, earned, justified, not a problem, but then lays out exactly how they're trying to use their influence to unfairly keep their share of societal power. And Crystal, there's a lot going on here.
I need to take a shower now.
Yeah, my IQ dropped 20 points just having to watch that entire thing. That being said, it's actually pretty instructive in order to see both ideological incoherence, how you can twist yourself into saying dumb things like being bought off with your own tax dollars, but also it's mighty convenient to understand how like some $200. I was once in a briefing. I'll tell you all this. I'm violating an off-the-record agreement, but I don't care. I was once in a meeting with Paul Ryan, in which Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy were trying to extol the benefits of a modest tax cut over the life of 2019 tax year. And they were like, look, this is like a couple $100 in mom's pocket. You know, this is like a new kitchen for somebody, right? Like, so
Costco membership.
Costco membership.
Line.
They
Yeah.
understand tax cut whenever it comes to a modest tax cut over the course of a year and the stimulatory effects for businesses and everybody else. But when it comes to a stimulus check, then that's like welfare. It is not enough, or it's too much. Why should a stimulus check to go to somebody who didn't lose their job? Number one, how do you determine, Congressman, how somebody lost a job or not? Through the IRS filings or unemployment or more.
Well, that whole
framing,
that whole framing is really silly anyway.
Yeah.
In his mind, I guess, in the like libertarian and neoliberal brain, the society is a totally fair meritocracy.
Right.
The cream rises to the top. And this is all bullshit. I mean, this is all completely ridiculous. And it's insane that you have people like Jeff Bezos making literally billions of dollars off of the back of people like the Amazon drivers or warehouse workers who are peeing in bottles and shitting in bags, right?
Well, he'd say that's creative destruction.
That's creative destruction.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So according to Crenshaw's logic, suffering, great for the poor, terrible for the rich.
Yes.
I don't ever hear him saying, hey, the rich should suffer a little bit. No. They're fine, but suffering is great for the
job
poors.
creators.
How about shame?
Yeah.
He says we should bring shame back. Shame for the poors, right? But never for the rich. They're amazing. They're the creators. They're so productive. No shame for them whatsoever. Money. Just money in your pocket. Great for the corporations, great for the CEOs, give them all the tax cuts in the world, terrible for the poors. Okay? So that's the kind of logic.
What he's saying there.
That's literally what he's saying. Money, shame, suffering. Money's good for corporations, bad for people. Shame, good for the poors, bad for corporations. Suffering, same thing, right? This totally insane, judgmental, horrible view of the public is what leads you to this type of ideology. And it really is insane, but it's also very heartening to see how completely rejected this ideology is by the public. We're going to cover later in the show the infrastructure package that hikes corporate tax rates. And that, look, in my view, woefully inadequate, not as much as it should be. It's got 75% approval. We know the stimulus checks, most popular thing that the government has done in decades.
30 years.
In decades.
But you see, he even rejects popularity. This is why he's like, I'm willing to tell you the truth.
Right, and that's the thing, that's a fundamentally anti-democratic
It is
view.
anti-democratic.
That's what
correct.
leads to you saying, and we've seen this throughout American history, where a group of elites get together and say, we really know what's best for this country.
I know what's best for you.
I'm going to control what actually happens. We'll have this farce of a democracy. We're really controlling what's going on behind the scenes. This is the mentality that leads you to, that's what an anti-populist mentality means. It means you don't believe in democracy. You don't believe in people having a say in what their government does and how their society is constructed. And that, of all the things that he said, to me, that is the most troubling part.
Absolutely. And what I try to do here is even use their framework to see how dumb it is. Like referring to humans as human capital stock. Okay, does it actually make sense to have your human capital stock lose their ability to provide for themselves, lose their housing, lose the undergirding of society in order to suffer so that you can then rebuild it later? There's this thing called the Great Depression. We actually tried it already. It didn't work out so well. It took a massive war and 10 to 15 years of deficit spending in order to get out of it. Okay, so does that make any sense? No, it's ridiculous. We have resolved these questions through our history, time after time after time after time. If there was ever a time in order to make sure that people did have money in their pockets, like a tax cut, for stimulatory effects at this current moment, would it not be now when the economy is on a downswing?
Right.
The idea, again, that first of all, the stimulus checks, it is not true that they didn't go to people who weren't suffering or whatever, which is that even if you were doing completely fine, if you go out and use that to pay down your consumer debt and you go out and spend it, at a business or whatever, you are helping that business which suffered. Ergo, it worked. Okay, it's not just simply about I lost X dollars, so I need to be replaced by the government. This is actually a better, more market-oriented way in order to distribute resources to where they need to go. But second, which is that it is just mighty convenient on those checks that when it comes to the actual checks into people's bank accounts, which is $400 billion, something like that, that Crenshaw is willing to go to the mat for a multi-trillion-dollar tax cut for corporations that did not do anything productive on a large scale. You can tell me all about some small business that did whatever, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Right.
But it was paired, as we know now, go look at Boeing and many others, hundreds of billions of dollars in stock buybacks that did not invest in anything productive. This is irrefutable, basically, at this point. And it just goes to show ideological incoherence, anti-populism, anti-democratic nature of this. And I guess our only saving grace is that enough people have said this bullshit is totally and completely rejected. He doesn't have a standing even in the Republican Party based upon this ideology. But it is disturbing to me that a member of Congress still speaks this way, especially one who is very popular.
So he puts it all out there because suffering and shame, which are the two things that he's really into here, only again for the poors, that's a tool of control. That's what keeps you desperate.
It is true.
That's what forces you to be the driver who has to pee and shit in a bag because you have no other choice, because you're desperate, because you want to be able to pay your rent, because you want to be able to feed your family, and the Amazon job is the only gig in town. That's what keeps you from forming a union down in Alabama or at other Amazon warehouses across the country, because they have all the control, and that's the only decent job in town. You're terrified to lose it. Okay, so those are tools of control. And the last thing I wanted to throw in this conversation is just some data. So the libertarian idea around why something like UBI is so bad is people are going to get soft, they're going to get lazy. He says it'll be like the end of the country and the downfall of the society, etc. We had the former mayor of Stockton, California on this show.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And they did research into, okay, what happened when you had a control group that got no extra money and then you had a group that got, it was just $500 a month, okay? Not a huge amount of cash every month, but for a lot of people, that's extraordinarily meaningful. They didn't spend it on booze or video games. They didn't lay around on the couch eating Cheetos. No, in fact, he told us about one young man who had skills to attain a better job, but literally was so close and so tight with his money, he couldn't afford to take one day off of his low-wage job in order to go interview for that new job. Just having that $500 a month enabled him to be able to go out, interview for that higher paying job that he actually enjoys, that fits his skill set, and allowed him to move up. People invested in their school. They were able to keep their lights on. It wasn't like they were living some life of luxury. So you know what, Dan Crenshaw, when you say people know better what to do with their money than the government does, you're actually right about that. You just need to apply it consistently and across the board, and then we'll all be there.
I'm not going to hold my breath for that one. All right, looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.